Brilliant. Okay. Hello friends, thank you for joining me for another episode of Archaeologists in Quarantine. Today I'm joined by some special guests. As you know from our last episode, we were talking about maritime archaeology, and why not carry on that discussion? As you can see from our backgrounds, we're getting into the nautical mood, getting into that underwater feel. Apologies in advance, we are having some technical issues today, so disclaimer out there now. Okay, I think it's time to introduce you to our guests. Please welcome Galina Borisova, Russian maritime archaeologist, and she researches in Mexico and Guatemala. Sorry, that's my cat in the background. We have Dr. Carmen Obied, maritime archaeologist, photogrammetry and GIS specialist. And we have Dr. Maddy McAllister, senior curator of maritime archaeology at the Tropical Museum of Queensland. Ladies, thank you all for joining me. I'm just going to do this. There we go. Brilliant. Okay. So thank you all for joining me today. It's definitely been, I know, quite difficult. Can you all hear me for starters?
Yes. Yes, can.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, perfect. So let's get straight into it. As everybody knows, we have already kind of discussed how we get into maritime archaeology, what it is, but we didn't really dive deeper into the different disciplines within maritime archaeology. And I got a lot of questions from students and enthusiasts alike. So if it's possible, could we have an insight into maybe the different types of roles, the different jobs you can do? Maybe Maddy, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I can start. Do you mean like jobs or like research specializations?
See, for me, it's kind of a bit of both.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I mean, maybe for you. Sorry, I just see my head.
No, that's fine. Okay, so I'll go. So I guess basically then research specializations, I know that there's probably 3 sort of subsets that I tell people about. So the first one is nautical archaeology, which is a lot of focusing on shipbuilding and things like that. So ships themselves specifically. And then there is maritime archaeology that I think is a bit more general and encapsulates everything from shipwrecks to harbours and ports and maritime cultural landscapes. And then we have the broader underwater archaeology, which allows you to research anything that is essentially underwater. Then in terms of jobs, I don't know, it might be different for everyone else in Europe and in the States, but for me over here, we sort of break it down into really research-based, so academic or within museums or institutes like that, or there is the state sort of government heritage agencies that manage a lot of our sites for us. So I think that covers maybe both of them from my end. I don't know about the other girls.
So, for example, Carmen, do you specialize in GIS and photogrammetry?
Yes, so I first specialized in maritime archaeology, but within that, as it's such an interdisciplinary subject, you know, we are now working more and more with technology and using that, you know, to be able to advance our understanding of the past. And so photogrammetry and GIS are 2 of the tools that we use and something that I have specialized in. For example, the Natural History Museum, I'm a research associate over there and I'm leading a photogrammetry project. And so we're basically digitizing a lot of their collections and making it accessible to the public. And that's some of the benefits of photogrammetry, is being able to make it accessible both for researchers and the public. And yeah, making it sort of more widespread. And Maddy's also an expert in photogrammetry, so she'll be able to tell you lots about that too.
And Galina, when we think of maritime archaeology in Russia, what's the general specialisms? I know you would also have photogrammetry, GIS.
Yes,
is there anything else?
I think it depends on the archaeological site we are working in. For example, it can be a ship. It can be, for example, a city, part of the city. like in Chersonesos in the Black Sea, or it can be, for example, the research of paleo landscapes. So we need different technology for that. And while working in Mexico, we are working in cenotes a lot. So this is another sphere. It's cave diving, and so we use photogrammetry, for example, of course, but we use different equipment for cenotes, for example, for diving in cenotes.
And I got a lot of questions about being able to get experience. How difficult is it? What are the challenges that students and maybe even yourselves may have faced trying to get experience after you did your maritime archaeology degree? Maybe Carmen first?
I mean, the first way to do it is definitely volunteering, I would say. That's often how it works in archaeology. So you'll start off by volunteering on different projects.
That's good. You're good, Carmen.
Okay. Yeah, so that would be one of the ways to do it. But then as you become more advanced and gain more experience, then you can work on a contract basis. You can get experience with working with museums. There are a lot of different opportunities there. I know in LA, one of the main approaches is doing cultural resource management. That's really big around here. So working with engineering companies and things like that, and then you go and assess the archaeology. A lot of rescue archaeology, which actually you'll be familiar with as well, but you work a lot on sort of more industrial, urban settings. So yeah, it really depends on what field you want to specialize, I would say.
That's quite interesting then. So it kind of seems to be the same situation, both terrestrial and underwater, in the sense of you've got to do a lot of voluntary work.
Right. Well, and also with maritime archaeology, of course, you have the diving aspect. It's not only underwater, of course, because maritime encompasses, coastal and anything related to water bodies. But on the underwater side of things, the more experienced you are at diving, that will give you more opportunities. If you're good with photography, that will open doors both for archaeological photography and for photogrammetry underwater. Or, if you're good at using geographic information systems, side scan sonar and other remote sensing equipment, that will also give you more advantages. So yeah, it really, again, depends on what your specialty is or your interest is, but definitely starts with volunteering.
And Galina or Maddy, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I totally agree with Carmen. It's like 100% when you're at uni and studying your degree, it's volunteering wherever you can, whether that's in a museum with hands-on things, or it's for field work, anything that pops up. But I maybe have a different view in Australia. We did a lot of excavations in the 70s, 80s and 90s on quite famous shipwrecks here. So a lot of my research is all just on shipwrecks. That's my passion. They sort of were the massive ones, like almost complete excavations of a site. And since then, we don't really do that anymore for reasons of funding, for institutes not wanting to accept mass collections of shipwreck material. So a lot of my generation of maritime archaeologists haven't actually had the chance to get massive experience in field work, particularly from that. So that might be changing in the next few years. It does depend on funding, but we're sort of, limited is not the right word, but we don't have the same chances that they had in the 70s and 80s, that's for sure, over here. I don't know about anywhere else. Yeah.
And Galina, anything to add?
In Russia right now, the basic is simple archaeological education or historical education, because we are trying to right now to implement a master course on underwater archaeology, but it's the first time in Russia. So we have only basic archaeological education, but there are plenty of field works which invite volunteers. So people who have basic diving certificates like open water diver, they can take part in such field work and decide if they do want to work in this field.
You actually just reminded me. So whilst I was researching women in maritime archaeology, I came across this really cool opportunity, and tomorrow is the last day to apply, but I will show an image now for everyone, any viewers who are watching. There's a really great opportunity to apply for a grant. So you can see we have with Women Divers Hall of Fame, they're offering a $1,000 training grant, which I thought was amazing. And it's really it's open to all women. As long as you don't have an official qualification, you can actually apply for it. So I put the link in the description box if anybody is at that point in their life that they'd like to try to learn how to dive. So the link is there, and you've only got till tomorrow. But it's interesting to see opportunities like that out there, because diving is pretty expensive. From doing it myself, I mean, and then the equipment aspect. So do you all have your own equipment?
Yeah, most of it. I don't have my own tank, but I have all my own diving equipment, underwater photography housing, scale bars, all the fun stuff. Yeah. But if it comes to, obviously the technology in terms of like remote sensing and all of that, that will be provided either by the institution or organization or, the company that you're working for.
Roughly, how much does it cost? I'm actually kind of scared for the answer here. It's quite a lot, I can see. It's a lot, yeah?
A full kit, like a diving kit, I would say it would easily be like 1,500 Australian at least. Maybe, no, I'll add that, 2,500 Australian, which is probably double that for pound, I think, at least. It's a fair bit for everything.
It is a lot, but it does last you a long time. So that's something to keep in mind, and you do use it on all your projects. So it definitely pays off in the long run, even if it's painful at the start.
Yeah, true. I agree with that.
And I have some equipment here in Russia and some in Mexico, because in Mexico water is about 25 degrees the whole year, and in Russia it can be ice diving, for example. So I need different equipment for that.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's quite a lot actually. It's true, because it depends what type of suits you're wearing, isn't it? You have the wetsuit, dry suit, then you have the more for cold waters, as you were just saying. Yeah, there's so many aspects that I don't think many people even think of. That's amazing. Okay, so there was a question that we did get in, and that was asking, what is the kind of basic differences between commercial and research maritime archaeology in the countries that you are all working in? Because for those who watched the program last week, we were kind of comparing Egypt and the UK, and it was actually quite interesting to see the differences in how maybe even the laws protect and not so much protect maritime archaeology. So how is it in Australia, in Russia?
Australia is quite good. We were one of the first countries in the world to protect our shipwrecks back in 1976 federally. Since then, we have been very good at protecting shipwrecks, but nothing else underwater. So it took for legislation to come in the last couple of years to protect a bit more. But I would say even then, not great. In terms of like treasure hunting, in Australia, you can't salvage shipwreck sites for profit. So we're quite good in that sense. Yeah.
In Russia, not so good, to tell the truth, because we don't have proper legislation for that still. We don't have any legislation about protection of underwater cultural heritage at all. So that's a problem right now. And we have a lot of treasure hunters, of course, in the Black Sea, for example. And we are working on it right now, but I'm not sure when it can be implemented.
Yeah, along the California coast, at least, a lot of the commercial diving is done on oil rigs. So a lot of the work at Scripps, for example, they tend to do a lot of work on rigs because it actually, becomes a hub for, marine life and also preserving archaeology. So that's some of the context that it tends to be applied to over here underwater. And then, on the land side is the cultural resource management side of things. Yeah, it's considerably developed over here in the US, even if maritime archaeology itself on this part of the coast isn't as much. People are starting, Scripps just developed a maritime archaeology program recently, which is fantastic. And I did a symposium there and got to meet a lot of the archaeologists pushing that forward. And so that's been really interesting. They tend to look at a lot of work in Israel, but then more locally, on the Channel Islands and looking at migration patterns and things like that. So yeah, some really interesting work developing over here.
It's such a shame about Russia. I'm actually quite surprised. Yeah, I'm very surprised by that. I can't believe it, actually. I mean, I've worked in Russia a few times, and considering the projects that we were on, it was the Scythian Kurgans in Siberia. But it seemed that they were very much, they wanted to promote that, the heritage, the culture. So I'm really surprised that maritime, the situation there.
That's a real problem right now.
Well,
we're trying to fix it.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that one. I actually have a question from YouTube. Thank you, Angelina. And she's asked, what was the moment at which you decided I want to work in maritime archaeology? It's a bit of a hard one, I know, because it's it's a big one. Maybe Galina. Galina, what was the reasons? Why did you do maritime archaeology?
I always loved sea. So I went into diving because I wanted to dive to the shipwrecks. And one day I was in Guatemala working with one project, terrestrial project, and we went to a small museum near Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, and it was a museum of underwater archaeology because in Lake Atitlan there is a sunken city, ancient Maya city, and I think that was the moment I decided I want to write my PhD about underwater archaeology in Mesoamerica.
So cool.
Amazing.
Oh, Maddy?
No, I was just saying that was amazing. That sounds like such a great, a good inspiration for you to start. My story's that exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I've been diving in the cenotes in the Yucatan, and it's just incredible. It's like, it really is like, there's so many opportunities there and so much archaeology to discover. So yeah, really interesting work. For me, it was definitely influenced by my heritage. So I come from very mixed heritage, and my dad's Egyptian. And so I was always fascinated, by ancient history and the pyramids and, obviously just understanding the past. And both my mother and my father are sailors as well. So I always had that kind of maritime influence and really interested in navigation, which kind of steered me towards my PhD, which looks at ancient navigation and mapping in the past, focusing on the Levant region, so in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I always dreamed of going to Egypt and diving. I grew up by the sea in Lisbon, and I always had this fascination of understanding, how we interact with the sea and how that evolves over time. And I love adventure. I love exploring, and archaeology is so interdisciplinary that really interested me. You meet people from all kinds of backgrounds that are trying to answer this common question, and I think that's really my motivator and how I got into it.
My dream is to walk in Egypt one day underwater.
Yeah, it's worth it. It's incredible. Yeah. That was actually my first maritime archaeology project, was in Egypt. So it was a dream come true for me. Yeah.
And for me then, I was one of those very fortunate people that knew what I wanted to do very young. So I grew up in a small coastal town in Western Australia, visiting my granddad, who was a fisherman. So I used to always be out with him on his boat. He'd tell me, I now know wildly inaccurate shipwreck stories and things like that inspired me. And I would always be down the beach and under the water or in the water whenever I could. So at about 13 or 14, I found out that not only can you study something like marine biology to be under the water all the time, you can study shipwrecks, which sort of pulled together my love of history and storytelling with always being able to still be underwater and have that sort of adventure. And the passion for being in the ocean, I think, is a real theme the whole way along for me. Yeah,
and I think especially in more recent times when, people are becoming more conscious of like ocean conservation and, protecting the planet and, reducing plastic, I think, the role of archaeologists is even greater now, and our responsibility to kind of, educate and work with different communities and make more people aware and involved to be as passionate as we are. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Oh, I'd love to. The thing is, I like diving, but I don't know how it would be to actually do it in a maritime archaeology setting, because you have so much time pressure. You're really restricted. I'm used to this time pressure in what I do, but I can't imagine, because you're underwater. First, we need to keep track of time, which is why you have the buddy system, if anything, to make sure. But being able to fit those deadlines, it must be quite frustrating sometimes, because you're constantly you want to do more, you want to explore more, and you only have sometimes a few weeks, if you're lucky, in one place in the year. How can you get over that? Is it trying to have larger teams, for instance, to get the work done?
Yeah, I would say it's a mix. I think we're used to that time pressure. So a lot of our projects, we'll tailor the questions we want to answer, knowing that we only have that limited amount of time. But in saying that, that is also why field schools are really good, when you can employ or enroll a lot of students that will actually, you can add dive teams, and that time underwater isn't as impacting on the overall research. But in saying that, it's also kind of fun knowing that you are working to a short time limit. You get in and you prep, and you're very, very organized and very, very prepared for maybe just one job that you're doing a day on a site, and you come up and then you do all of your data processing and things like that. So yeah, I'd say that we're very organized. Often you can't speak to your buddy or your partner underwater if you're just on your basic scuba. So, think about mapping and measuring sites without being able to query things to your partner. You just have to be very, very organized at a basic level, but it's fun still, I would say.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a good way to put it, because you definitely go in with a focus. Like, you have to know exactly what you're doing before you go, and it's all very planned, and for safety reasons too, because we are diving, and a lot of the times there are those risks involved. So and other ways you can do. So for example, I was working on a project in Cyprus last year, and something we used are these underwater scooters that power you, and so we're doing it for surveys. It helps you cover a lot more ground. So, once you find a concentration of sites, then you will, leave the scooter, focus on that area, record it, and then you have a bit more of a sort of less of a time restriction. But then having that allows you to cover so much more ground and kind of overcomes those limitations.
That's really cool. We have 2 scooters.
Oh yeah, it was great. Yeah, it's fun to use, but often you have those for a limited amount of time. So you obviously, again, have to really plan and organize accordingly, and on when you're going to do it and when it makes sense. Because for certain work, it's not going to make sense, because you really do have to look at it very closely and meticulously. So this is more for sort of widespread surveys. And again, it depends as well on what depths you're working at. Like in Spain, I was working about 32 meters deep and doing accelerated decompression dives. So we only spent about 30 minutes underwater, and then the rest was decompressing. So yeah, that's also a factor to consider.
Yeah, that's something I think a lot of people who don't dive, the decompression times, it's so important. And I remember learning the emergency way if something happens and you're gonna ascend. So I can't actually. Have any of you been in that situation where you've had to kind of do an emergency?
When you've had to rescue people if they're out of air, for example, and you'll do you'll go through the whole rescue process, and you'll share air, and you'll go up slowly, still, and safely. So I've had to do that a couple of times. But usually you always have someone that's, you know, trained or has that kind of background, either on the boat or in the water. So, you know, we have a whole system in place. And that, again, that's why the buddy systems are important.
Mm. And just reminded me of a video. Carmen, I hope if possible, if you'll be able to maybe just tell us what's going on in the video. It's the one that I posted. It's your video. Yes, yeah, this one. I think it'll be quite nice for people to maybe get an idea of what it could look like underwater. So I'm just going to share my screen, and it'll be great if you could just tell us a little bit about what's going on. So I'll do that right now.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
There's me diving in.
Yeah.
Okay, signal. I mean, you give it up as well, of course. So here we're using the dredge, which pumps the silt, because when you're excavating underwater, you're just doing a light fanning, and then it creates this cloud of silt. And so what these dredges do is it's like a suction device that clears up the area, but you have to do it very safely, because we're working, you know, this is wood that goes back over 2,000 years. You know, it's an ancient Roman shipwreck that we found. It was completely covered under the sand in the seabed. And so you have to be very careful, because the wood is very delicate, and, you know, you have to be careful not to tuck that in. So that's something you have to take into account. So here you can see the different, like the wood construction, the ship construction. So it was really interesting here, because you could see the mortise and tenon. You can't see it in this video exactly, but you could see different sort of styles of construction. And so that was really fascinating for us over here. So yeah, we were working at about 32 meters. This was the example I was telling you. So we're doing accelerated decompression dives here. We were working in Catalonia in northern Spain. And this basically turned out to be a Roman merchant vessel that was doing local trade in the region. So from like Rome along France, and then down to the southern coast. We found lots of amphora there dating to the Roman period. We found lots of iron nails and things like that. And you could also see evidence, again, as I was saying, of frames sewn to the hull. So yeah, it was really a fascinating project. And we were working with the museums and local institutions over there. So yeah, it kind of gives you a glimpse into the past, because, you know, you go down there and there's nothing there. It's just a clear seabed. And then, you know, we had an idea that the rough location of where it was based on hard hat divers that had found it back in 1898. And so yeah, we just did some surveys, went down and found it. So it's a very exciting feeling. It's very humbling. You know, it really kind of acts as a time capsule and takes you into that moment and helps you understand it. You then have to obviously process all the data, but yeah, it's a great project.
It looks amazing. And so many people actually started messaging me after they saw this clip, and they're like, how do I do that? You know, how can I get on these projects?
Clearly it was a bit rambly, but yeah, get the gist.
Well, I'm sure just seeing that clip inspires a lot of people, because that's the dream, I think, to be able to see all of that, everything that you were finding in that small glimpse in that 1 minute video.
And yeah, I mean, especially for people interested in shipwrecks, it was really interesting. And being able to see the planks and timbers held together in the mortise and tenon construction is really interesting to be able to see underwater. And yeah, things are really generally well preserved underwater, especially if you're under the sand. So that's another benefit of underwater archaeology as well, and to be in that context.
Wow. And Galina, you, if I remember correctly, you kind of focus more on underwater caves, right? So you've worked in that sort of area.
I worked, there are three main parts of underwater archaeology in Mesoamerica. First one is cenotes in Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. It's a natural sinkholes in limestone, and they are really wonderful, amazing, and beautiful. And for ancient Mayans, they were kind of entrances to the underworld. So these places were sacred, and there were a lot of sacrificial offerings to the waters of the cenotes. So one of the most popular is the sacred cenote in Chichen Itza. But there in Yucatan, there are more than 2,000 cenotes. So it's a huge work waiting for us. And also there are some lakes in Guatemala, which were kind of sacred places too. So there are some offerings on the bottom of the lakes. And there is an, in Lake Atitlan, there is a city which sank about 300 AD. And another field from the water archaeology in Mesoamerica is the Gulf of Mexico, which there are a lot of shipwrecks. And one of the most popular and important is Nuestra Señora de Atocha. It's a shipwreck of 16th century, and it carried a lot of gold from New World to the Spain. So there were found about 5 I forgot about it. That doesn't matter. So so I worked in Mexico in cenotes, and also in Guatemala with Lake Amatitlán. And there is a project now in Lake Petenetsa. My Polish colleagues worked there one field season, and they are going to work there again. So hope I can join them.
And I have that sounds amazing, by the way. It's a shame I don't have the photos on my laptop to show. Maybe next time when we have our one-on-one live stream. But I do have a question from Angelina again. Thank you, Angelina. And she asks, what are the differences between diving in a lake and the sea in terms of equipment and so on?
First of all, in the lake, it's fresh water. So there is a difference in buoyancy, but I think that's all. Sometimes when the lakes are high in the mountains, they can be some additional restrictions, but nothing else. The main difference is between diving in the lakes, in the seas, or in cenotes, because cenotes are underwater caves. So we use other equipment for that, and we duplicate every equipment. But in fact, we use different equipment for different purposes. For example, for ice diving in Russia, we use different equipment too. So it depends on the place and on the purpose of the dive.
And I had another question that kind of follows on from Paths Unwritten. Thank you, Paths Unwritten. And they asked, is maritime archaeology in tropical climates significantly different than colder climates? This is also to do with the equipment in the way you conduct it, not really.
If it is ice diving, for example, yes. For example, in the Baltic Sea in Russia, we have a lot of shipwrecks, and yes, it's more complicated. But if we walk in the Black Sea in summer, it's like not so hot like in Mexico, but it's okay.
I think cold is the main thing that changes, like the temperature.
Yeah.
And this is interesting. It's about high altitude diving. So apparently some dives in the Alps 2,000 meters above sea level. So you need some special equipment for that. I'm not sure if any of you have experience in this region.
What?
So there's some dives in the Alps, which is 2,000 meters above sea level, and you would need some special equipment.
Equipment?
Because of the water pressure.
No.
No? So the water pressure, you just adjust.
Yeah, you take into account extra pressure. So it changes your dive times, like the time you can spend on the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah, but the equipment is the same.
Right, it's just the dive time that changes, yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay, so the water pressure affects, okay, so the question was, would the water pressure at all be affected by the altitude of the body of water? So really it's just the pressure in the sense of how you dive. That's just the technique side, the technical aspect.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Thank you for those questions, because I never even would have thought about that. It's amazing how, it's all the technical side. I think it's why they say you should, if you want to do the diving aspect of maritime archaeology, you should try to get as much diving experience as possible before you even start the surveying or the excavation side.
Oh, yeah, definitely, because the actual archaeological techniques itself the practices don't differ, too much from the land side. It's more the equipment that we have to use to adapt to that environment that changes. So.
And I mean, for me, from my experience, it's the weight of having the tanks here. It's that weight. I'm used to feeling it here and then carrying it, and it's just little things like that really.
You have to carry a lot of tanks. It's definitely a workout.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a free gym. So we have a question that's slightly going away from the equipment and the tools of the trade. We'll get back into the world of shipwrecks. And Groovy Historian, thank you and hello, Groovy Historian. They've asked, what is the world's oldest complete shipwreck? That's a hard one, I think. I think that's the trick, I think, for you, complete. Okay, maybe let's get rid of the word complete. Maybe what's the oldest shipwreck?
I mean, the work that from the university I went to, University of Southampton, the Black Sea project is believed to be one of the intact shipwrecks, and they've done some incredible work out there. It's more than 2,400 years or 2,500 years old, and it's in the Bulgarian coast of the Black Sea, so in the Black Sea. And I believe that is now believed to be one of the oldest intact shipwrecks. They've done incredible work down there, and there are some really, really fascinating models they've made using photogrammetry underwater. So definitely worth checking that out if you haven't. That's one example.
And that's because there's a lot of wood on that, isn't there, Carmen? Still left? Yeah.
Exactly.
And that for people that don't know is because of the depth. It's at something above 100 meters. I'm not sure. They've found so many shipwrecks in that project. They swap. It's also colder, so there's certain differences in our climates underwater that protect different materials better. So generally in colder, deeper, darker water, things like those wooden shipwrecks do preserve a lot better, as opposed to the shallow sort of dynamic hot water environments. So that's amazing. And that's very recent, like Carmen said. It's a cool discovery.
So you can find lots on that. They also had a documentary come out recently, and because of the conditions and the desert they were working at, they were using ROVs, which are remote operated vehicles, and that's how they were kind of surveying the area, doing the photogrammetry. So it's really interesting work. And it shows you, how technology can really help us advance in this day and age.
So what is the oldest all of you have worked on, in the sense of anything underwater? It doesn't have to be a shipwreck. It could just be maybe some artifacts that you were surveying. What is the oldest deposit, archaeological deposit you can think of?
I guess if you're looking at paleo landscapes, that would probably be the oldest. But that's not really in terms of shipwrecks or artifacts. That's more sort of looking at, ancient landscapes and rivers, and to try and understand the landscape. So that's something that we also use to understand a region and how it developed over time. But in terms of wrecks, the one I showed you is probably the oldest shipwreck that I've personally worked on. So that's about 2nd, 3rd century BC.
And Galina?
I think it was human bones, older than 12,000 years. So it was the bones of the period of Ice Age, when the sea level was lower than now, and some cenotes were caves. And so some people and animals entered them, And so in cenotes, sometimes we can find human remains of the ice period. And I think it's
very cool. And Maddy?
Mine's really different because in Australia, we're a pretty young European country. So in terms of actual shipwrecks or anything like that, for us, it's really limited to a couple of 100 years. So for me, it's the Dutch wrecks in Western Australia, so 1629, around there. But we are now really embarking on some pretty impressive work on submerged cultural landscapes for Indigenous work here. So that will be getting quite old. I'm assuming anywhere from 40 to 75,000 years dating back. So pretty good. But yeah, shipwrecks, we're very young down here.
Amazing. Which reminds me, you just finished this 7 shipwrecks in 7 days. That was very cool. I've also put the link of that in the description for anybody who's interested in just over 1 minute clips, and they're really nice introduction into maritime archaeology, the curatorial side, seeing the artifacts.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of trying to find ways to share not just our shipwreck research, but the things that I now have in the collection up here in Townsville with the public. And I think that, doing things like this, your live stream, but also then something short and attention grabbing. So that was a trial and part of our National Archaeology Week here in Australia. So not just maritime archaeology, anything that goes on. And by all accounts, it was well received. So I'm glad to hear that even across the sea, it was interesting and useful.
No, it was. And I hope you do more if you have the opportunity to. Yeah, you should.
Excellent.
Yeah. You do a weekly one, no pressure.
That would be good. That would be good. No, I just have to pick artifacts, which is the tricky part, favorite ones.
Well, I read also somewhere, I think it was to do with Tropical Queensland Museum itself, that you have a collection of diving helmets and potentially one of the oldest.
Yeah, we've got, I think as far as we know, it's the second oldest in the world of the typical, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, that bronze sort of helmet with the diver in an old suit. So we are lucky enough to have not just the shipwreck collection up here, but also our diving tech collection. And that one particularly is the Langley diving collection. So very generously donated by the Langley family down in Tasmania. And I think I have about 30 diving helmets from all over the world from that particular one, I think is 1845 or 46 dated to all the way up to quite recent. So yeah, it's a very fascinating collection, that one. We're going to be showcasing it a lot more in the very near future.
We look forward to seeing it. It's amazing when you look at how technology, because in a way it is technology, it's innovation, isn't it? You needed that to progress for more work to be done. I mean, if you look at what you guys can do now with the face masks, and I think you can have radios, right? You can have radios built inside. It's just amazing. It really is. I actually have a question moving on, again by Paths Unwritten, and they're just asking, it's okay if you don't know the answer. They just said, curious if the participants are aware of any interesting projects in the Great Lakes, US, Canada, that would be worth reading up upon. Any projects you can think of?
I'm not too familiar with that region in terms of archaeology personally. I don't know if any of the others are. But we can look into it and follow up on that. So
yeah, and if not, we can just leave the links in the description at some point. Okay, so thank you for that question. Let's see. I'm going to see if I've missed any. Anyone on Instagram, please head over to YouTube, where just a more comfortable viewing experience, and also send your questions in, please, because your live stream will be ending soon as it's coming up to 1 hour. So gentle reminder. Okay. So another question we have is, actually, it's a question about, before I ask the next one, a question about 3D modeling. So a lot of students, again, they were messaging me saying they're very good at GIS, at CAD. They did that in their first year. They have some working experience in this area. And then I suggested, oh, how about, photogrammetry, 3D modeling? It feels like kind of a natural route, if you like, into wanting to do more with maritime archaeology, but a little bit more specific. So when it comes to 3D modeling, how are you able even to get into a role like that, other than studying? Is it really just going via university? Is that the best way in?
No, I think because it is so new in terms of photogrammetry, that we're all in a way a little bit self-taught of using the programs and the software, and we're by no means photogrammetry specialists in the algorithms behind it. So I would say that actually getting into something like that beyond the GIS and remote sensing is just, using even your iPhone and a little camera and the free versions of software, and actually learning the basic principles behind the photogrammetry. And I'm sure that at universities now they're teaching that as a recording technique for sure, but I would say you can do it just as easily yourself at home to start with, to get the basic idea of it. I don't know about Carmen.
Especially if you have a photographic, like a background in photography, I think that really helps, because at least that gets you through the first stage, where you're shooting in different angles and getting the lighting right. And, you basically have to create this stereoscopic overlap, and that's how it's then processed in the software. And so yeah, I think, step one would be, brush up on your photography, and then, download the software that you can use, like Photoscan, although it's changed its name, I forgot what it is. And yeah, then just practice. And there are lots of workshops as well, especially if you want to learn in an underwater context. Again, I would brush up on learning how to do photography underwater, and then going to one of these workshops where you can then apply it in an archaeological context. And I know they have a lot going on in the Mediterranean that they run, and yeah, I'm sure in the US as well, it's starting to develop more so.
Mm-hmm. And in my experience, photography is a lot more difficult underwater than people think. From my experience of trying to record, I thought I was recording really well. Like, I thought I was in it. I saw a turtle, and I was like, yeah, I was filming. And I looked at my footage after, and I was like, it's like a child has picked it up, and it's just like carrying it around, because it's quite difficult to get the technique. And then I can't imagine with photos, because if you get it wrong, well, that's probably your only chance sometimes.
Yeah.
Just surveying.
Yeah, you have to get that buoyancy, get that buoyancy right. But it's challenging, but it's really great. If that's something that you're interested in, I think it's worth pursuing, and it can become a valuable asset on a project.
So I'm just wondering, again, no pressure if you can't think of any, but can you think of any pioneering women in maritime archaeology?
I'd probably say that Anna Frost is probably the one that comes to mind for most maritime archaeologists and women archaeologists. She was definitely the pioneer, particularly in the 50s. So yeah, she did a lot of work in Turkey and the Levant, and really developed maritime archaeology in that region and beyond. So I would definitely look into Anna Frost's work if you're interested. I think, her first project was Cape Caledonia with Throckmorton, and and then she's worked all over from Egypt, Cyprus, and beyond. So that would be.
She's definitely one of the ones. I think I remember from my experience as well of researching maritime archaeology, she just popped up. It's very interesting, her background actually.
Oh yeah, and I mean, the Anna Frost Foundation, we know a lot of archaeologists working on that, like Dr. Lucy Blue and many others, and they're continuing that work and really prioritizing giving opportunities to archaeologists from the Levant and the East Mediterranean, those regions. So the legacy continues.
And because obviously I understand, like, the if it was again, field archaeology, I know the answer to this, but I'm curious, when it comes to maritime archaeology, how was it in the ratio of gender, male to female ratio of studying, for instance, or even working in the discipline? Is there quite a big gender gap, or actually is it quite neutral? Is it quite similar, 50-50? Because in field archaeology, it's 50-50, really, it's half-half. Sometimes 60-40, actually. Sometimes there's more women on site, and in school as well.
Yeah, I mean, it probably depends. From my experience in my master's, when I first specialized in maritime archaeology, we definitely had more female archaeologists, interestingly, but I'm not sure if that's consistent in terms of, at least on a degree, academic perspective. But usually in projects, I would say it's quite mixed. But again, it depends on the region you're working on and things like that, I would say. I mean, it's definitely more, yeah, it's definitely more male dominated, if we're honest.
In Russia,
Oh, sorry, Maddy, go.
Maddy.
I was just going to say, back in the day, it was certainly the boys' club, the thing to do, you know, the 70s, 80s and 90s. I'm sure most of us now, it's 50-50 when we study university, and even more so, like slightly swayed to the female side. But I would then say that to take it out of that and look at the actual jobs, and even in Australia, I know that you know, our heritage practitioners around the States here, every single one of them at the moment is male. And so that really should be rectified. And I think reflections in uni is pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially in universities as well, as soon as you go higher up in certain roles, yeah. I think that's when it becomes a lot more obvious that it's more male dominated. Obviously, you know, we're trying to change that and things are, you know, slowly moving forward, but you definitely still get that sense of.
Okay. Galina, how is it for you in Mexico versus in Russia?
Both in Russia and Mexico, there is a huge gap. So very few women.
And how has your experience been being then maybe one of a few females on a team? How has that been for you?
For example, in Russia, I was the only woman in a team, but it was okay. They helped me with tanks, for example, when they were too heavy.
Yeah, it just doesn't have. It has that. It says apologies. It has its advantages sometimes because it does help. But it's one of those things. It really give and take, and it depends on the situation, the site, and so on. But I just wanted to ask that because again, I've had some students who are interested in maritime archaeology, and they weren't sure on how it would be to work in it. Because I did some, again, when I was researching, I found, I don't know how recent this is, but they said, again, 50-50. Male, females at university studying. But when it came to university faculty positions in maritime archaeology, 37% were held by women. So it's interesting to see the higher levels in the world of archaeology in general, I would say. That's when I think you start to see a disproportion.
Yeah, I mean, it shows the opportunities are more 50-50, but then not in terms of jobs. Yeah, I would say. The interest is there 50-50, but not the opportunity for work.
Instagram, we're going to be refreshing the live stream, so hang on in there. If not, just switch over to YouTube. We have a few more questions coming in. Sorry, ladies. Maddy, I know it's very late or very early in the morning for you, so still thank you for staying there with us through it all. I just have a few more questions.
No, all good.
Yeah. Okay. For anyone who doesn't realise, Maddy's in Queensland right now, and I think it's about 2 in the morning.
Yeah, it's 2 a.m. for me. Yeah.
And for Carmen, it's 9 in the morning in LA. So a very big time zone difference there. So,
yeah, we were joking that I'd be tired from waking up and she'd be tired from trying not to fall asleep. So you're both balancing us out right now.
Yeah. And Galina and I are just happy. We're just like, yeah, it's fine. It's maybe time for dinner, but okay. So I'm just going to head over to YouTube for a few more questions. Let's see. Okay, this is from Alexander. Thank you, Alexander. What is the most famous archaeological findings? The top 5 in the world. What's the top 5 most famous maritime archaeological discoveries, artifacts? Okay, maybe the first one that comes into mind, that might be easier.
I would start with Antikythera shipwreck and the Antikythera mechanism. If for those of you who don't know, I would not be good with dates. It's quite old. It was a shipwreck found in the 1900s by sponge divers, and it has one of the oldest. They call it the oldest computer in the world from it, but it's a mechanical sort of astrology device, I think, from back then. So that's the first one that pops up for me. Yeah.
I feel like I've read something about this, actually. I can visualize it.
Yeah, it's an interesting read if you just pop it into Google, and even the Wikipedia page has a really good description of it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Anything else, ladies, you can think of? I know it's a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great one.
How about, okay, how about, I remember a few years ago, your Past Preservers presenter showreel video. It had you speaking in front of this amazing ship that was salvaged and put into a museum in Sweden.
Vasa.
Oh yeah, that was the Vasa shipwreck.
So is that one like a really cool example then of?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a one that we we study as maritime archaeologists, and to get to see it was really fascinating. It's again, the fact that it's so intact as well is another great example of being able to understand shipwreck construction. And it was in Stockholm at the museum, and it was I believe from the 1600s, I believe. I think it dates back to 1600s off the top of my head. So yeah, that's another great one, definitely.
And Galina, can you think of any, maybe in Russia or Mexico?
In Mexico, I think there are some Spanish galleons, for example, Nuestra Señora de Atocha, with a cargo more than $500 million, and one of the Spanish shipwrecks to Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes. It sank in the early 19th century with a great cargo from New World to the Spain too. And in Mexico, there are some human remains of Ice Age, for example, Naya. It's a small girl. Her remains are older than 13,000 years, so one of the oldest in Mesoamerican region. I think it is.
Cool. Sorry, Carmen, did I cut you off there? Did you have anything else to add?
No, you're fine. That was it.
Oh, okay, brilliant. So thank you for those examples. I have another question from Poets Pub. Thank you, Poets Pub. They've asked, do you have any advice or projects on the books now with making artifacts, exhibits, sites accessibility to the visually impaired communities outside of creating 3D models to be handled? We can always maybe, if we do have any examples, Poets Pub, we can maybe add them into the descriptions, or what I can do is I can message you through YouTube. Maybe with some links if we can't think of any.
Yeah,
we work with acoustic archaeology and things like that are trying to recreate, past sounds, and in order to understand those buildings or monuments or contexts. So that's one way that they're trying to recreate that experience. So that would probably be one avenue that I would look into.
Yeah, it's tricky because so much of what we do is visual, and you know, a lot of our recording is photographic underwater. A lot of how we communicate things is visual. So that's a really thought-provoking question when you also can't have things for people to touch and to hold. So yeah, I have no idea. That very interesting.
Absolutely.
And Galina, maybe anything to
Me
add?
too.
Yeah.
No.
So Poets Pub, thank you for that, because it's yeah, thought-provoking. So maybe, yeah, it's something to think about. So thank you very much. And if we can think of any examples, we'll add that for you. Okay. Dum, dum, dum. Okay, this is from the Lost Cartographer. Thank you for your question. Is it better to take individual photos or extract video still frames for processing underwater photogrammetry? So this is back into the techniques of photogrammetry.
I'll start with that one, if I may. I personally, I'm always going to be a fan of still photos. I think that they capture better quality images and more detail for preserving that record long term. In saying that, I know that there are sites where it is so difficult to stay on a track and on a rail, and maybe the only thing you have is a GoPro or something. So taking video and pulling stills is still acceptable, but I'm biased. I think that stills are far better.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with Maddy on that, and that's definitely the approach that I've taken with underwater photogrammetry, so I would prioritize it too, if you're able to.
Yeah.
Galina, do you have any experience with this side of maritime archaeology?
With photogrammetry?
Photogrammetry.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah, because in our projects we always have one specialist who's focused on photogrammetry, so we can pay attention to other sides of the project.
I guess this kind of reduces human error if we have one person as well, or two people, or a small team.
Yeah, you definitely tend to have people like split up into different roles and focuses. Like when Maddy and I were working in Oman, for example, like you were focusing a lot on the side scan sonar side of things and detecting anomalies in the regions. And then we were part of the dive team. And so we would go down and then, you know, survey those anomaly sites and then determine whether it was archaeological or not. So that's kind of how you team up depending on, based on the different specialisms and focus.
Very interesting. Okay. It's a nice example of teamwork there.
That's how we met. So yeah. Great.
Digging buddies is always, nobody ever understands the relationship between archaeologists. You get to know someone so fast. In the space of a day, sometimes it's like a year you've known someone. It's so
working in difficult conditions and remote settings, and you know, things go wrong and you really have to be resourceful and work as a team. So it's a great bonding and learning experience for sure.
I have another question. Let's see. I have a few more questions actually. I'm trying to see. I'm trying to see if we can. I'm going to try and make the questions flow a little bit. Okay. I will go with this one next. Okay. So again, from Paths Unwritten, regarding Mediterranean archaeology, have any relatively intact Minoan shipwrecks been found? Minoan. Okay, I'll say the question again. Regarding Mediterranean archaeology, have any relatively intact Minoan shipwrecks been found?
They have. I'm trying to remember the name. I believe a Bronze Age shipwreck was found off Crete, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I think that goes back to like 3000 BC, more or less. But I can definitely look that up and send them that. But there is evidence.
Cool. Anything else to add before I ask the next question? No? Okay, brilliant. We'll try to get through these as fast as possible. Okay, the next one is any suggestions on what to read about identifying or locating submerged paleo landscapes? Carmen, you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I mean, we use bathymetry, single or multi-beam bathymetry for surveying an area and trying to identify paleo landscapes. It's definitely not my expertise, but it's something we did quite a bit in Southampton during our maritime archaeology degree, and they do a lot of work with that in that field. But yeah, that's one of the ways that you can do it. And then as well with coring as well, you can get samples from the subsurface, and that can tell you, about change over time in the landscape and the effects of sea level change and things like that. So that again helps you understand the landscape based on the differences in the soil, in the core samples. And you can also do that, in an underwater setting, which we did in Cyprus as well. So we were trying to determine the date of this breakwater, and so we were taking core samples of it underwater, and then having someone who's a specialist analyze that data, and that helps us basically understand the whole setting and what happened. We think it was a storm or some kind of event that happened there, and that we can determine based on those core samples.
That's really interesting. Next question. Let's see. Okay, so it's back to something earlier. No, let's not do that one. Okay, no, it's basically I'm not sure. I can ask the question, and it's up to you, or maybe it's again back to be it's about discrimination. How do you feel, being sometimes a woman on site? How does that maybe affect other people's perceptions of you on site? Do you feel that you are discriminated against because, okay, maybe it's like that famous saying, it's bad luck to have a woman on board, right? That phrase that we would hear. Yeah, Galina, you're smiling, so from your experience, has anybody even said that to you? Do people still have this superstitions? No, good. Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, I've met other boat captains and skippers that still have old superstitions like that, but nothing against women. Yeah, like they didn't want to have it was after an excavation of some burials, and they didn't want to have bodies on board the ship overnight, the boat. So we had to put them on land because it was bad luck to put them on the boat with the crew sleeping. So, but nothing about women. I think, I don't know about the other girls, but I have so far in my career had a very fortunate, I would say, upbringing and mentorship, where I've had both men and women never ever hold me back in any way because I'm a girl, and that's quite lucky. I think I know that there are a lot of land archaeologists here in Australia that do face discrimination for that, but never anything because of I'm physically different or capabilities or qualifications or anything, which I know is very rare. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same for me, really. And I think it also helped the fact, my supervisor throughout my degree was Dr. Lucy Blue, and, we become really good friends over time. And she's, a really strong woman who's really pushed maritime archaeology. And so maybe being influenced by that has helped as well in terms of the kind of settings that I've been around, at least starting off and developing that mindset. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen, and the discrimination is definitely happening and prevalent. And, more recently, there's been scandals in terms of conferences and harassment and things like that. And that's kind of brought, to light these kind of issues that happen in an academic setting and beyond. So it's definitely something that's being addressed, and I think being brought more into focus now, and people are trying to fight to change that. So definitely an important topic, and something that we're trying to, obviously, as a collective, improve.
It's very true. The last point you made about the conferences, we had a scandal, if you like, at a recent award ceremony. So, and that was very public, and it was, in a way, there was a positive outcome, because it showed it was even more so, considering Okay, I will say. So at the Council of British Archaeology, there was an award ceremony. A grant was given to a research paper. It's like it's kind of when you highlight somebody's research and you think that they're kind of the future and you want to help them in that way. And you want to show the world that this type of research is going on. And unfortunately, it was a master's student's dissertation. And it was about gender inequality and discrimination in archaeology. And when her award was being given, people started to laugh in the front. And it was, yeah, and when this happened straight away, within a few hours, it was all over social media, Twitter. I think it happened through Twitter, if I remember correctly. She tweeted it, and she tweeted how she felt about the process of it all. What was interesting is with the laughs, as soon as it happened, the chairman at the time, Mike Hayworth, I think his name is, he actually addressed it and said that this would not be tolerated. You know, your behavior right now, it's not okay what you're doing. So right there and then he addressed it. And then there was an official statement afterwards that was released. So it's definitely brought it more so to people about how this is going on. Even at an award ceremony where she's been given an award for her work on this area, she was getting snarky comments at. So it's definitely something that does have to be addressed, and thankfully is being addressed. Yeah, but I feel like with maritime archaeology, especially the diving aspect, you're on a boat, you're stuck in the middle of nowhere sometimes. You know, you're on an island, you can't really escape it as such. You just got to hope you're with a good team. But let's try to be a bit more positive. It doesn't happen to everybody, and of course, no matter what job you're in, you're going to get, unfortunately, this type of behavior sometimes from people. You're going to
it definitely goes beyond archaeology. Yeah, absolutely.
And discrimination happens both ways as well. So it's possible, but we're obviously just talking it from our points of view. Okay, that's a little disclaimer there. Don't have a go at me. Okay. Next question. Okay. How difficult is it for a normal person to have the opportunity to be a part of a maritime archaeology project? So I think this might mean in the sense of, especially with the work that I do, we have open outreach. We get the public involved sometimes and they're able to come onto an excavation and take part. How is it for outreach projects in a maritime setting?
I think that a diving project for someone who doesn't have any background experience in archaeology or diving, it's quite difficult to be allowed to be involved purely from a health and safety point of view now in Australia. There's a lot of things we have to do to make sure we're all safe, and bringing in the public to dive on a site while we're working on it is never going to be a good idea. In saying that, we have so many citizen science projects popping up now that are of people sort of looking after a wreck that might be in their local area, and they're doing photogrammetry, they're learning how to do it, they're reporting the state of the shipwreck to the local authorities. So there's that aspect, and wherever we can, we try to have it open to the public to see some aspect of the project. But I'd say it's probably more tricky to be involved or to visit an ongoing underwater archaeological dig.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you're an advanced like scuba diver, like a scientific diver or a commercial diver, or cave diver in the sense, then you might have more opportunities. For example, like in the Mazotos shipwreck project in Cyprus, I believe they work with, divers with more advanced skills because they're working at 45 meters, and that becomes more limited even for archaeologists, depending on what qualifications they have in terms of diving. So, and we tend to, archaeologists do often work with local communities, local divers, local fishermen, in order to understand the landscape and work with the local communities to get them to also want to protect their heritage. So there are opportunities in that sense. But yeah, in terms of just working with the general public, it does get a lot tougher on a maritime context.
Anybody who is still online with us, if you do have any questions, please get them in now, because we are getting ready to finish up. Okay, so you've got 10 more minutes. Okay, everybody, 10-minute clock down, maybe even less. Okay, so we have another question. Okay, this is from Past Preservers. Hey, Past Preservers. They've asked, how do you feel about TV work? Maybe in the sense of how the media portrays maritime archaeology. It's a tricky one, actually, because TV is TV, but in general, how do you feel maybe?
It's definitely like kind of sensationalized, and you know, the as maritime archaeologists, we always get the, you know, Atlantis questions, the and Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, you know, those are kind of the things that stick in people's minds when you talk archaeology. And so I guess that's where we have to step in and, you know, not take away that excitement from people, but at the same time, make them aware of what's actually involved in archaeology. And I think that's what Past Preservers does really well, is that it has these experts that, you know, can represent archaeology in an accurate way while still being entertaining and engaging. And I think that's what, you know, TV really needs for this kind of subject.
It's hard to find that balance. It's very difficult. Yeah, so it's true. The team, Past Preservers team, are trying their best at least to address that dilemma that we do have, making it, you know, interesting. So you mentioned earlier Atlantis. Have you found Atlantis in your diving experience? Do you think maybe the Bermuda Triangle? Have you been anywhere in that region? Galina, maybe? Or something like strange, maybe? Have you found anything strange and exciting? Maybe a strange symbol, or, I don't know, potential aliens? Some sort of artifact. How about this? Because these are the questions I feel we all get anyway. You see it all the time online. And I don't want to knock these pseudo-archaeologists or pseudo-scientists, but it is interesting, the fascination with Atlantis. It's interesting how people have that.
Yeah, and I would say that speaking for myself, like a lot of my interest really early on came from reading books about that, you know, as a teenager or as a kid, and being inspired by those sorts of mysteries. So if that loops back to your TV question from Past Preservers, I think that we have such exciting and fascinating stories to tell of our research. We're often just really bad at telling them in an exciting way. So having the starters of Atlantis and the Bermuda Triangle like give us sort of a bit of a leg in of interest, then having the support of producers and directors in film that actually keep that excitement but keep the science in there as well, is walking that fine line. So yeah, I haven't found anything exciting like Atlantis though, so not yet.
Not yet, but you know, there are submerged, we do find lots of evidence of submerged cities, and a lot of these could have been inspiration, you know, for the story of Atlantis. So again, that's something that can give us clues, and you know, but
okay, another question from Past Preservers. What should we put on screen? Plans, projects? Maybe in the sense of course, yeah. I mean, recently, if I remember correctly, they've just, I saw an advert for a new maritime archaeology show. I haven't actually looked too far into it, but it seems that in general, maritime archaeology is making its way more so onto TV. People are interested, in, as you said, Carmen, like these submerged cities. There is so much that are now popping up again as sea level drops.
And I think because now as well, we have access to so much more with, you know, advancing technologies, and being able to also, you know, share what we find in so many different ways, from, you know, social media to TV. You know, I think there are lots of different mediums that can now be used and make it very accessible to the public. So I think that helps to kind of draw that captivation back into maritime archaeology. But in terms of projects, I mean, it really depends on what people are interested in, especially as even just, you know, amongst us, although we all tend to work more on an underwater setting, you know, it's very different regions, different times in history. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so much to explore. Personally, I would want to, you know, have a show based on archaeology in the Levant and looking at ancient navigation and recreating ancient sailing routes and trying to understand those landscapes, working with local communities and, understanding the shipwrecks in the region, working with, illicit trade and things like that. So I think there's lots of interesting avenues there to be explored.
Well, fingers crossed in the future. Yeah, it sounds amazing, actually. It's true, there's so much there. Something about the sea, I think, fascinates so many of us, because archaeology on land, like as I said in the promo video, a lot of us think of ancient Greece or Rome, or even in Mexico. There's so much amazing archaeology in Mexico, but it's on land. So we can only imagine what's in the sea, what's been lost to it. So someone actually asked a question, this is quite a good one, from Katana. They've asked, how different is it from field land archaeology in terms of preservation of artifacts? It's quite an interesting one. I think that's quite different. Well, I don't know. Isn't it all waterlogged? So it's a different process.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the best answer to that for us is if it's wet, keep it wet in the field. That's the the go-to rule. And I think, well, I don't know if it's very different to land, but maritime projects I've been on, we always work with a conservator there. So they know far more than us, but the basic is, yeah, if it's wet, keep it wet.
Great phrase.
Yeah.
Anything to add, anyone, before we go on to the next question?
I mean, yeah, it also depends on the different materials. You're going to, use different conservation methods if it's wood versus iron versus organics. But again, you have to have a conservation expert to do that part. I mean, we also get involved, but yeah, you should definitely have a specialist in that.
Mm.
And
Galina?
it is very important in the cenotes because the environment in cenotes is very stable. There is no daylight, there is no temperature change, so it's about 25 degrees for the whole year. So, for example, when we took out some organic material, it can destroy very fast. So, like in 1 week, it can be just trash. So, yeah, there is a very complicated conservation process, and it is a huge problem for Mexico because they don't have enough specialists in conservation to work with all that artifacts.
And is most of your artifacts staying in Mexico then for this post-excavation side or the conservation?
Yeah, a lot of them are staying in the cenotes.
I mean, that is good because it's like it brings on to one of our past Archaeologists in Quarantine episodes where we're talking about the impact of colonialism and this idea that other countries have a habit of taking artifacts, away. But when it comes to joint ventures, I think it's a bit different, of course. Nowadays, universities and projects are working together using their technologies to really progress the industry. So now it's a bit different. So it's a good thing and a bad thing maybe that it's staying there. It's a shame if they don't have enough conservationists there, or conservators, apologies. But there's a great question here from Delby. Thank you, Delby. And they've asked, so imagine now you're diving, okay? Do you ever get that moment when you're diving and you think to yourself, my gosh, what the hell have I got myself into? Yeah, that happened to me, I must admit. That did.
I don't know, I love it. It's probably the most calm I ever am. If people know what I'm like, I'm always doing a million different things. And when I'm diving, it's the one time I'm just extremely just focused and calm. And yeah, I love it.
Water makes a lot of people peaceful. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Okay, we have another question. And we're going to be wrapping up questions now, everyone, because Carmen has some studying to do, right?
Yes. Got my coding boot camp, which I'm doing at the moment. So again, like I said, always doing a million different things. So
yeah. So I think maybe we'll look at this as the last question. Oh no! Oh my gosh! There's a lot of questions.
It's okay.
Okay. We'll do the last question for today. Do you have to specialize in one aspect of maritime archaeology, or can one work on Bronze Age shipwrecks, cenoites, underwater caves, modern, etc. So do you have to be a specialist or more so a generalist? I think it's to do with, the different situations. So if you're underwater caves, generally it's a different diving technique, right? It's more specialist. No? Is there not more danger in a cave?
I don't know if they were getting it. Do you have to know specific details about those sites? And I would say no, if you are a generalist maritime archaeologist, as long as you're a good, solid diver and you know how to dive in those conditions, you know the methods and the techniques and the theories behind a lot of what we do. So, you can pick up and work on a different project across the world and it's the same thing. But yeah, I would say to be the environment. Cenotes, I'm sure, are far different. But yeah, if that's what they were asking, I think, yes.
Anything else to add?
For example, I work in different projects in Russia, in Mexico, in Guatemala, so it's possible.
Yeah, me too. And I've worked on some different projects, and some weren't necessarily, my specialism, but because again, you have that background and the basically the techniques and the practices are the same, then you do become adaptable as long as you're doing it safely and you have those diving qualifications. If it is underwater, then you should be able to apply that to the context of the region. And sometimes, people forget that maritime archaeological sites can be on land too. I mean, I worked on a project in India that used to be by the coast, and then because of change over time and sea level change, it was then inland. And so we were analyzing this ancient Roman port that was involved in Indo-Roman trade, ancient Muziris, and that was all done inland for the project itself. So, I think that's another interesting aspect that people don't necessarily associate with maritime archaeology. So.
I think that's, Maddy, anything else to add? No? Okay, brilliant. I think on that note, I think it's, I think it's a really nice place to finish this conversation for today, because we've been speaking for an hour and a half, and I know, Maddy, now it's 2:30 in the morning. Carmen, to get ready for your coding. And maybe if anyone's interested, we could speak about coding in the near future. Actually,
archaeology.
Yeah, exactly. Coding in archaeology. I've just seen a question and I really would like to ask it, and I think it'll be quite fun to end on. I kind of feel like this is for you, Carmen.
I know.
Do you feel like mermaids of the 21st century or trendsetters of smart fashion?
I mean, Maddy's the Shipwreck mermaid, but
yes, true, Shipwreck mermaid. I've just got an image or something that I feel I need to share.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have the other side where I do modeling, so it's definitely very different to the archaeology world. But sometimes they do collide. I've done several underwater shoots, and because I'm obviously very comfortable underwater, that's something that I'm able to adapt to very easily, and it's definitely a lot more fun. And
you know what? Okay, I think I might try and find that photo. It's amazing. I don't think anyone's seen this photo. I think I'm going to quickly just show people because it's so cool. How long did this shoot take? While I look for the photo quickly. How long?
Do you mean the campaign one?
Yeah, that one.
Okay, so that one was taken in the Cayman Islands. The shoot itself actually takes about an hour, maybe, total, because I mean you have to keep going down to get the shot just right. But I worked with a fantastic team out there. Miss Aniela and Cayman Jason and Jason Washington, lots of others.
So I remember it's on your Instagram. So everyone, this is Carmen's Instagram. I've put everybody's links of the Instagrams as well, so you can
just go now.
Yeah, this is all maritime. So this is your photo. Is it this one where we can see the photo?
Yeah.
Oh, this is amazing.
So yeah, that's one aspect of maritime archaeology. No, I'm just kidding.
This, being able to breathe underwater, like how long are you underwater when you're doing this? Can you remember?
So actually, you know how I was talking about like scooters that we use underwater? So that was one of the methods we used for that. So as well as in archaeology, we use in shoots where one of the dive assistants will be using a scooter and take me down, and then you get into the pose, you hold your breath. and then you realize the dress is pushing you down and you have to, you know, really swim up, but they can help you. And we did a few where it was just dives as well to make it look more natural. Yeah, you do have to be able to hold your breath, but again, that's part of also being a good, I think, scuba diver. You're more.
Sorry, I didn't realize there was music.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So everyone, if you'd like to have a look at how she made it, it's right here. It's so cool. I think on that note, it's a great way, I think, to end today's discussion. It's been an absolute pleasure. Apologies again for the technical hiccups at the beginning. I'm not going to be using these virtual backgrounds ever. I think it's not happening ever again. And just want to say, as a disclaimer, that was Carmen's idea.
Sorry. Thanks for blaming me.
It's Carmen's idea.
I joined in and didn't leave me hanging. So thanks.
Yeah. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who has sent all the questions, and there was a lot. I'm sorry I have not been able to answer. Maybe half of them I've been able to answer. It's just a lot. So maybe next time we can address them. So again, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Instagram, it's been a pleasure as always. Adios. And I'm now going to say goodbye to YouTube. So thank you, ladies.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go. Done. And Instagram, sorry, we're still live.